Geraldine Eng, and I work as a policy analyst at the OECD on green finance and investment, and in particular on clean energy investment. So we're very fortunate to follow on Dr. Mathur's presentation with a very distinguished panel to discuss specifically the power sector, and which is really critical to achieve a transition to a low-carbon economy in India. And I must say that having looked at so many countries from an OECD and emerging economy perspective, it's fascinating to see what's happening in India in the power sector. That a few years, what Dr. Mathur would say may have seemed like a dream, and it's true that in the past few years, looking at the renewable energy target of 175 gigawatt by 2022 as being now very accessible and to be exceeded likely target, it's happening and it's a reality. So it's very impressive transformation that's happening in the power sector in India. There's also a lot that's happening in the transformation of the electricity sector and how independent power producers are increasingly entering the market. At the same time, we see that we can go beyond what's happening right now, and of course, how to do more, how to do beyond just the large-scale deployment of solar, what to do to further solar deployment in the electricity sector, and how to perhaps support the deployment of other renewable electricity technologies. So I will introduce briefly the panelists and then give them each a chance for a brief intervention followed by a discussion. But before I start, is there any question for Dr. Mathur? I don't see any. Okay. But I will ask you questions, maybe just to kickstart from. So the first panelist, and we're very, very honored to have you, is Mr. Upendra Tripathi, who is the Director General of the International Solar Alliance. And as you well know, the International Solar Alliance was launched at the International Climate Conference in 2015 in Paris at COP21. Very ambitious initiative to support the deployment of solar internationally. So it would be fantastic, Mr. Tripathi, if you could explain what the initiative is doing to promote solar. But before, maybe let me ask you one question to follow up on Dr. Mathur's intervention. Do you believe that the decarbonization of India electricity sector is inevitable, and how can solar contribute?
I mean, Ajay is a good friend of mine, and like him, I too am very positive about this, in fact more so than him, because it is not merely a question of pricing in the market, but it is a question of the way technology is moving. The other day we were in Munich, and we found a company who has brought tiles, the tiles that we make roofs from, and this tile is unique. It generates electricity, it cools down the temperature inside, and it also in winter it warms up. It's still not in the market, but they said in a year's time they will be there. And these tiles were different colors. You can choose red, black, any color that you can choose. Now I was working in a province called Karnataka where you have, the western region full of tiles. Now think of a tile which is a power producing machine. And we went to DLR in Germany and they put a dish, and immediately a candle made up of iron just melted in a minute and a half. And now the types of high-tech technologies that are coming, and the way, as Ajay correctly pointed out, the prices are coming down. If you combine both, and there is nothing that can beat, so it's inevitable. But the only one question that comes is the trust. It's not only we're talking about India alone, we're talking about, say in ISA, 121 countries. But each country has the same amount of confidence in managing technology. Is that each economy we can actually observe these technologies? Are they well prepared? And are there economies which can actually bring down the cost to that extent or manage big institutions like India can do? So it is not merely a question of price in the market. It may be very low. But if you look at the capacity of citizens to take that also plays a crucial role, particularly in small island countries, in LDCs. So we have to do more than just bringing down the price in the market and creating that trust that requires to take these technologies, to accept technologies, and even to accept money from other countries. And that trust is a critical thing that we have discovered, and of course that is linked to ISA part. We are trying to create a star center in each country, and everybody says, what is the star? This stands for Solar Technology Applications and Resource Center. We need intellectual resources, we need aggregation of demand at national level, at international level, and that capacity building, that, you know, the command and control saying that, look, we can ensure quality of solar products, goods and services in the country is very critical. Because quite a few countries feel that, you know, the moment you say that, you know, decarbonization, the moment you say solarization, you just bring and dump things in the name of solar and then you disappear, and those things keep hanging there. So that trust, that control over quality, you know, all those things are equally important to bring. But I'm absolutely positive that the way things are moving in India, decarbonization is inevitable. It is going to happen.
Thank you so much. So maybe it's a perfect transition for you to explain how the International Solar Alliance, maybe giving some examples of how you support solar projects in India. I don't know, for example, on standardization, capacity building you just mentioned. That would be fantastic.
I mean, as you correctly said, you know, in COP21 it was launched jointly by, you know, France and India. In COP22 they opened the treaty for signature, and by COP23, little after that, it came into effect. So 15 countries are ratified, and very quickly it, you know, moved, and in that time scale of international organizations, it's pretty fast. Within around 2 years, it has come into force. We have got the UN registration done, and the host country agreement has been signed. The notification has come. We're quite happy about the, you know, progress. Now the question is, you know, what are the programs that we are running? 4 of them. One is solar applications, one on rooftop, one on mini grids, and the, you know, the finance program. We're quite happy about the finance part, because we formed a task force headed by Terawatt Initiative in Paris, TCX, CII, CEW, in fact, which did a lot of work for this, and World Bank were members. They did their feasibility part. They wrote to Green Climate Fund, who agreed for, or examining to agree about $500 million to put in this fund. And we won that, we should call it Paris Fund, like Paris Declaration was at the back of ISA. And another $500 million ISA will mobilize from various countries. And I'm told the economic experts, they say that if you can mobilize $1 billion of risk mitigation fund, this will bring in $10 billion from the outside the market for solar. And I'm not an economist, but I have enough faith in them. And I feel that it's going to work. Right now, the World Bank has taken over. They're examining this, you know, how to create this platform, how the nitty-gritties can be done. But if that comes through, $1 billion, if they can, you know, put in place, that will be the first ISA's concrete mechanism to do. Second, we are in touch with the European Investment Bank, who are bringing in, I think, you know, I mean, it's not supposed to be so open, but some 60 million euros, and that will provide sort of, you know, ISA, European Investment Bank mechanism, where 4 countries can be taken from Asia. And this is not like the Paris Fund, which is now open for industries and industrial projects. This is for the poor, for the off-grid sector. And a sort of thing that World Bank and SBI have done together, and PNB and ADB have done together in India, you know, financing the aggregators for rooftop, where the cost of capital comes down. The same thing can be done in these 4 countries. And it won't be a sort of, you know, mechanism where actually it may be a sort of fast loss facility. But these are the financial instruments we are trying to put in place, and in a year's time, of course, we have done as much as we could. And other side, of course, you know, I must have visited the MEA for 5-10 times, MNRE, CII, just to see that, you know, that 20% of the India's $10 billion comes to Africa. And I'm happy to say that India has passed the, you know, the so-called requirement orders, the OM we call it, office orders. And 1.4 billion worth projects have been sanctioned in some 23 countries. And from ISA side, we are trying to persuade the countries to not only just apply for the loan, but to make sure that these projects become sustainable. And that requires local capacity building, where actually we are starting from September 10th. We are starting a batch of 165 solar engineers from the member countries who have signed or ratified. They will be trained here as master trainers for 21 days. When they go back to their country, and that star center is very critical in that case, they will join that star center and then start training more people who can actually be self-employed in terms of providing the goods and services that the sector will require. That apart, we are thankful to France for having put in 300 million euros through AFD in the beginning, and during 11th March summit, they made 1 billion euros. We are very happy about that. Now we are telling the UK, the Australia and the Netherlands, if they could also put in some money like India and France have done. But more apart, most of the encouraging news has come from World Bank, where they have agreed to almost 28 to 30% they are going to put into the renewable energy in general, solar in particular. EIB, ADB, AFDB, and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, with every Green Climate Fund, with whom 8 or 9 banks, we have these joint declarations, where we jointly and actively put up 2 years action plan to see that more and more money comes into this sector. And in fact, we're asking World Bank, why don't you raise resources in India in rupee and keep the money in rupee, and so that the hedging risk, some 5 to 6% it costs, can be brought down. In the program 1, that is about the pumps, which of course there are millions and millions. India alone has 14 million diesel-driven pumps. There are so many irrigation societies in India, in all the provinces, those who still run those old junk pumps, put long back. So there is tremendous scope, and we are talking in the scale of millions all in India. If you take all ISA countries together, it will be around 40, 45 million pumps which are there, which can be solarized. And for that, I mean, the LED example we are trying to emulate through EESL again. If EESL can come with us and put a global tender, and immediately, India has committed for 100,000 pumps, Bangladesh for 50,000, Uganda for 30,000. Many countries have come together. We haven't reached the magic figure of 500,000 yet, but we are somewhere close to 4.88. And once it comes, we'll go for a global tender. It is a lot of challenge. The rates in Uganda, in Bangladesh, in India, and the panel rates have already come down. So whatever you are talking about bringing down the rate further is only on the pump part. Now, how it will go, how it will happen, that is very interesting. And right now we are consulting all the countries, because ISA runs programs as demand driven. The countries must say that we need this, then only we do that. And that stage we are in. So far as the GREED program, the rooftop, of course, ISRO has been very helpful. They've got a software which on Environment Day was put in place. You can go mention the place, it tells you some 8 parameters of a rooftop or even ground-based solar. What is the efficiency, how much tracking, angle, inclination you must have. And we are moving forward, and I'm thankful to all the countries who have participated, all the 67 who have signed, 37 who have ratified. We would like to reach this figure of around 100, God willing, by 2nd of October, when the first assembly session is due. Third, we are planning to make it for 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and the really interesting insights you just gave us on the role of international cooperation and the role of multilateral development banks funding to support scaling up of solar financing. And of course, the end goal is to make it commercial enough that you can have a larger flow of private sector capital. And in countries that you mentioned, in African countries, Bangladesh, etc. The good news is that I think in India, we're already seeing a large flow of private sector coming, despite the fact that it could be even further. And project developers such as Raghunath, who's I'm very pleased is on this panel. So I will introduce him briefly. Raghunath Mahapatra, I've known you for a few years now, and before you used to be at Wellspun Energy, and now you're the head of solar business for Hero Future Energies. And I think you have a really long experience in solar project development, so we're very, very pleased to have you here today. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you think are the key priorities to move solar deployment further in India. And I know how much you know about the fact that beyond the fact that it's been a very promising adventure so far for solar in India, there are still outstanding rigidities in the electricity sector that prevent further integration of solar, whether through the situation with distribution companies, transmission losses, or perhaps the need for further investment in electricity storage. So and many other issues. I'd welcome your views on how we can further solar development, and maybe after we can talk about the other renewable energy. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Geraldine. It's a good opportunity. Thank you, ORF and OECD. Also, it's quite a privilege to sit in the same thing as Mr. Tripathi, Mr. Mathur, and Moscow Service. It's quite a privilege. What we do is we are developers. So our job is to get resources, collect resources from multiple places, like banks, investors, IFC, World Bank, and then invest that for economic returns, because ultimately we'll have to do that. That's the primary objective. So our focus all the while, whether it was in Welspun or Hero or many other primary developers that we have today, like Tata, Acme, or Renewable. There are many like us. The main objective so far has been the grid solar. The reason is that it is policy driven. There is certain amount of business certainty, because business needs the certainty in terms of policy, economic environment, funding, and other economic environment. The stability is extremely important for us. And given that it is a grid, so when I started entering the solar market, we had signed PPAs at 17 rupees per unit if you take the rupees, or we can convert that, but 17, then it came to 13, then we have seen 10, then 9, 7, 5. 5 was a big thing because people said that the new entrant, which that time in the state of Madhya Pradesh, 5.05 rupees, it will ruin the market. There will be no more further investment. The plants will go down. It has not happened because only last evening, along with out of the 2,000 megawatt, we as Hero, we have won 250 megawatt at 2.53 rupees. So yeah, so that's, and I will not go into our models or at what price we are comfortable, to what extent we could have gone, what our strategy, but we succeeded in getting a 2.53. So the price has come to that. Personally, I will not be speaking officially on behalf of, but personally, many people believe, when I talk to them, they believe that the tariff will go down below 2 rupees. Now, when they say there is the tariff that we are getting today is simply a function of the prices of module, that is international market, price of inverter, part of which comes from international market. Then another, say 30 to 40% of the project cost is local. But up to 60% we buy mostly from outside. So we need Forex for that. So while we have been trying, government has been trying various, there is a conflicting policy that we should manufacture domestic, we should encourage them, protect them, but what is happening is the price of those modules are so high that the tariff will not come down. So government is aiming at continuous reduction in tariff, and that doesn't go well with the protection that it wants to provide to domestic producers who are not so efficient. So that's one of the things. Now coming to that, that's a bit of history, what we have gone through from 17 rupees to 2.5 rupees, and how that, what actually determines the tariff. It's not only this cost, there are three things that gets into it. One is the cost of materials, another is the cost of funds, and another is the speed of your execution. So now, other than the speed of execution, probably we don't have anything under our control as developers, although we take up to 80% of the project cost from banks, and we spend around 50 to 60% from outside the country. That's one part. Now coming to solar and how it is going, the way we see it, we don't think solar has matured as yet. As I'm saying, that many people think the tariff will still come down to, say, probably below 2. I will not tell exact figures that people keep talking about, because some figures are still looking unreasonable, but it might become reasonable. At 17 we never thought, at 5 we never thought, so it might still become. Now that's one part, but as Mathur sir was saying, that still we produce when sun is shining. The storage, that's the next step. Beyond solar, possibly that's the storage, because that takes the infirmity out of the supply that the sector needs. You can't tell a business which uses input as electricity as an input that, okay, the sun is down, please shut down your industry. No. So you buy coal, gas, or whatever. And they are all 25 years. The people invest money for 25 years. So it will continue. So that's one aspect. Probably storage is something that we should really be focusing on. Today, the price that they are quoting around $150, no, around $250. It has to come to around $100 roughly to make it economic sense. But at the same time, what we are saying is we will use the battery during night. That means I have to store the energy during the day. So what I am saying is then the plant capacity has to double. And so that it produces for the daytime and stores for the night time and produces. Actually, it is not double. Because today our average utilization is around 6 hours per day. So that's 1/4. So when you take 1/4 utilization, what we call capacity utilization factor, or the in thermal jargon PLF, so we are having only maybe 20%, 19% max, 25% with all kind of technological innovations. Given this framework, we need to install, if we have really 24-hour firm supply, we need to invest 4 times in the solar generating plant, plus the battery, and then we don't have to have, but I'm not sure when that day will come. I'm honestly not sure, because technical innovation is still going on. We are still experimenting. At Hero, we have a separate division for experimenting with storage. So we are thinking of setting up a lab in-house to do the experimentation. And also the transportation and the utility, the storage, the batteries that they go, their duty cycle is completely different. Because here it is long-term, in vehicles it is short-term, so the battery technology is evolving. Third thing is, what I am hearing is that the material that is silicon today probably undergo change. The MIT lab is experimenting on a carbon derivative that will replace silicon. So to me, carbon does not exactly replace silicon, but they are experimenting on that. So that's another way. So ultimately, another thing, going back to my own experience as a consultant, where I spent around 20 years as consultant. So we were doing something for Madhya Pradesh for an erstwhile organization called SEDA, the Canadian thing. It doesn't exist in India anymore. What we found is the people, the farmers, the people, the industries, anyone who uses electricity, he doesn't need electricity. He needs heat, water, light. These are the 3 things essentially they need. So when you go for that, and the farmer really doesn't care when he needs water, whether if electricity is available, he uses it. And if not, he gets a diesel genset. He needs water for his crop for which he wants. And another thing we found the farmers is that they can't pay monthly. We bill them monthly. They say we raise a crop twice a year. We invest and sell at one point of time. We have income twice a year. So if you can charge us twice a year, probably we'll be more equipped to use this. Now, probably all those things will go away, because just 1 week back, I had gone to Tripathi Saab's old office, the seminar Secretary Saab had called on Professor Solanki from IIT Bombay. He has invented one. He uses solar panels to create an induction furnace. Not furnace, sorry, the chulha, the oven for cooking. So previously, we used to use the heat. And the solar used to focus on the heat for cooking, heating, and everything. He's saying it's not required. We put 2 panels, 800, 600 watt, 800 watt, 1000 watt. He has 3 versions. So he says that we have, then the induction takes, he has designed a circuit which makes it high frequency, and that he does. So if we supply this, we take off the pressure in the village from the gas usage, or mostly from the uses of the forest wood, the firewood, that they are continuously cut down. So they need 3 panels, and then the whole thing is quite economical. And why we were there is that he was asking if our engineering team can work on that to reduce the cost of the total model, because it's a prototype now. So I have put my technical team on that. They are designing this evening. They might give me a model to see at least a prototype design. Then we'll have to get it manufactured somehow. And so that will take off. So essentially the focus, the beyond solar is, solar today is thought-wise, it's an extension. When we started in solar, I remember, We used to go to the ministry and everyone, and the banks, we used to teach them why solar is different from thermal. Most of the policy at that point and still is being driven from thermal. That means build large size plants, which is a need. I mean, we need economies of scale, but build large size plants as big as you can and then transfer it to as far as possible to supply. Possibly that's probably if we can put two things, the distributed generation like the cooking, the heat, the light, and the water. If we can put these three things together, possibly we don't need to extend our grid anymore. So distributed solar, proper focus, research on distributed solar probably will lead us to a gridless society, and which will be a desirable thing. There is no point wasting lines. When we construct transmission lines, the first thing the environmental study says that it will kill birds, and it will kill bats, and it will reflect, and so many issues come up with transmission lines. Probably so, maybe we can look at not building the transmission and distribution lines so much, but rather go for off-grid, distributed, mini-grid, microgrid. Now, when we say all that, the load management, the demand management, the plant management, we need to have data-driven, information technology control, the computer control, probably the software has to play a role to manage them efficiently. And to take it further, probably we can take help of the IoT. That's the next thing, the Internet of Things, to transfer the data so that the big data can be analyzed. And now the latest thing that probably can be used, instead of a single approving authority of everything, we can have that distributed trust-based thing. That means instead of authority-based approval, we can have the trust-based approval. I'm talking about blockchain. So blockchain has moved from financial technology to logistics already. I mean, supply chain is already experimenting with blockchain. We don't know, but probably it's time now. We think once the electricity gets distributed, probably there will be no authority to control it. So probably we'll have to perfect a model of blockchain to provide the infrastructure foundation to move there. So that's what I will think the way we are looking at Hero, all these things we keep on debating from time to time. So probably it is one of the things, this blockchain, IoT are essentially my ideas we have thrown into their thing. So now they are actually partially blaming for bringing in unrelated things into power, because it's still driven by people who are hardcore technology guys who have never seen anything that is decentralized. I think that's where I'll stop. There are a lot more things that are happening, but we'll put it there.
Thank you so much, Raghunath. Really. I think you're a goldmine of ideas and information and knowledge. You mentioned so many ideas, and I'd love to pick up your brain on many of them, but just to recap, you mentioned the record low tariffs through tendering procedures in many states, and Madhya Pradesh was one of them in the past 2 years. You mentioned the role of electricity storage, the importance of distributed renewable energy to perhaps overcome grid scale constraints in terms of transmission and distribution capacity of the grid. On the question of distributed energy and on the question of grid scale, coming from the OECD, we always wonder, what is the role of policymakers at both state and federal level to help facilitate access to financing and investment in a renewable energy project. And you mentioned, for example, for a farmer, well, he can only pay twice a year, so maybe that means that the financing structure can be adjusted to meet its needs. Similarly, on the grid scale, you mentioned those record low prices. What do you think, maybe quickly on first the distributed solar, what is the key role of policymaker? Is it on the financing to provide subsidized loan, etc.? And on the grid scale, what is really driving the price down and how to make sure that it can be scalable? Is it the long-term power purchase agreement? Is it the structure of the tendering process that is competitive? And maybe one controversial question. India has a single buyer model in the electricity sector right now, and you've mentioned that huge opportunity for distributed solar. Where do you see that can be conflicted in the long term? Because that would mean in the long term that some distributed solar households can sell their own electricity, and how could this work if we envision it in the longer term, maybe like Dr. Mathur has been telling us the future could look like? It's a lot of questions.
Too many questions. So first I will clarify one thing that I mentioned, that the farmer can pay twice. And the farmer can pay twice is an OPEX model. That means somebody else is supplying electricity to him. The asset is owned by somebody and he is only paying for consumption. In that case, he will pay twice a year. If we can enable him to buy the capex, that means he can invest in a solar plant on his roof, probably it will move from OPEX to capex straight away. So probably what we'll have to think is, the main challenge that we faced when we did that study is the lack of data. I mean, how much the farmer can pay. We found, personally, I was there sitting in the village for 3 months trying to understand that. Because I was an electricity guy, I never had understood village. Although I come from a village, but not from agriculture side. So I wanted to understand. I found the farmer can pay anything that his crop can enable him to do, because he is selling his crop in the market. That market is extremely volatile. Now, suppose his crop fails, and then he has to pay for the electricity. He doesn't pay. Now, comes in a politician, elections are coming, he waives off the charges. So when anything fails or does not fail, people have expectation that they don't have to pay. So number one is expectation management. That the government has to somehow, I don't know, that requires a political will. That's the toughest one. But the easiest thing for policy is, number one, I'm not sure if it applies to them, but today if an industry wants to set up its own solar plant, I know we do off-grid as well, beyond 1 megawatt, he is not allowed to sell. As he is not allowed to consume. Then he has to go to net metering, then he has to take a permission from the DISCOM. DISCOM is worried that his cross-subsidy charges will go away. We had done one study from SPDA side, sir, that we had done that. If I set up a plant in Delhi, and the NDMC area, New Delhi Municipality Corporation, it's a corporation, it's a municipality. So I'm not allowed to sell, any third party is not allowed to sell electricity to its consumers directly. So anyway, without going into the legal problems, we wanted to understand, before knowing that we cannot supply, we went ahead and did a study saying, one of the embassies actually came to us saying, can we, because we consume a lot of energy. Like Germans consume as if they are still in Germany, so it is huge. Americans consume as if they're still there. The French consume, one of the three, I'll not take the exact name, but one of those three came to us saying that, yeah, can you facilitate sale of electricity? Later we found that we cannot, because it is part of NDMC area. But more importantly, what we found is that if I set up Delhi doesn't have space to set up a plant. If I carry the electricity from Rajasthan, which is nearby, to Delhi, the charges of me connecting to DISCOM, from DISCOM to the Transco, from Transco to this Transco, the paying the SLDC system operator charges there, here, then again down the value chain, the cost of electricity goes up around 4 times. I have a working, I still doubt that working, but it was done by a professional from our industry who does that. If it becomes 4 times, forget whether NDMC is allowing or not. Nobody can consume. They are getting cheaper. So now the point is, they are consuming whatever they are consuming. If I want to sell dedicated solar, the embassy only wanted one thing. If I can prove that it is solar energy. So I said, we will help you set up through one of our members. Hero is also a member. Wellspun was also a member. So one of our members will set up a dedicated, say 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt plant. Okay, they consume much more. But that plant, and then we'll supply you. Then we realized 16 rupees, they're not going to buy. I had several meetings, even from their own foreign office, their energy office, the guys who control the embassy, everyone. It doesn't work. That's one policy probably we can look at, how because what is happening is we have so many systemic inefficiencies are built in over a period of time because of the unique nature of it is systemic inefficiency for sector, but economically, It is designed to charge as less as possible to the poor people and then charge more from the rich people. So rich here is industry, commercial, industrial consumer, commercial consumer, and the poor is the domestic consumer. So this cross-subsidy charges, yeah, that's another component I forgot. There is a cross-subsidy charge, open access charge, this charge, so many things. It comes out large amount. So that's one probably we can figure out somewhere that this can be happening. Second is identify the paying capacity of the farmers and have a mechanism. Three things we tried to do. Enable supply of this electricity, water, light, water and heat for the farmers. That means this solar stoves, solar light. That at Wellspun we had a project we did as a CSR project in Leh. We supplied one village with electricity. What we did is we did not have this inverter, AC, we did not have anything. It's an isolated village. So what we did is we converted everything into DC, DC bulbs, DC fans. They don't need many, but it's very hot out there. Although it is way above, but it's very hot. So we converted everything into DC. So possibly when you go to decentralized, probably technically it might make sense to shift everything to DC, not having AC. AC helps you transfer it over a large distance at a very higher voltage, because transformation is possible only in AC. So you can take it to a large. So given this framework that I'm talking, probably it will make sense for CapEx. And in that, probably a first loss fund or probably somewhere we can take the risk. Now the second thing that I'm coming, I was part of a forum called Clean Energy Financing Forum, so which was put up during Obama's visit with Modi ji. So what I was part of that along with many other people. What we figured out, the financing requires that we have a first loss facility and probably risk. Now risk, every banker has his own risk profile. So they charge a premium, same for our country. So depending today, possibly, Japan has cheaper funds. I don't get a forward on Japanese yen. I don't get it. So I have to buy in dollar, and dollar through a swap has to go to yen. So the cost goes up. So given that, probably I will figure out a fund which will take out the risk. And another thing, probably if we can have the components that the family and village will require, to bring them out as cheap as possible through high volume incentives, structural incentives rather, so that the farmer can afford it. So one is the policy-wise simplify everything so that there are not so many things. Number two, I hope that the farmer tomorrow, I think discoms will be happy if the farmers go away from the grid, but still they should not charge them that you have become a generator, you should need a license. Generation doesn't need a license now, but distribution. So microgrid should not need a license, because once you start distributing, it will make sense. India is a very entrepreneurial country. There will be 2-3 people in every village who will set up a small plant and start supplying. They should not be classified or barred from being a distributor. That's policy-wise. Financing, I would believe that, simply put, we need a fund for both CapEx and OpEx, a combination of first loss facility plus a risk management facility, and so that the person can afford and the electricity becomes affordable for him.
Thank you so much. Let me now turn to Vikram Mathur, who's a program head at ORF. And I have to say, for those who haven't seen the publications up front, Vikram, along with other colleagues at ORF, have published really excellent work on how to unlock clean energy investment in India. So I really encourage you to look at that. So Vikram, maybe you can do an intervention on the challenge of how to go beyond solar, and also maybe the role specifically of how to mobilize green SMEs for, like, for example, solar rooftop or solar heating that Raghunath just mentioned.
Okay, thanks very much. First, I'm going to be a bit of a party pooper, because I think from a kind of programmatic perspective, the way we sort of think about low carbon transitions, I think there's a complex kind of, in many of these projections that are used for, sort of promote, suggesting, the future of solar in India, there is a very complex assumptions around technology and demand, right? So I think one thing that obviously as the program that we run on climate and development at ORIF, one of the things that we are actually quite interested in looking at is low carbon transitions, but also within the coal sector. I think that is also something that is quite critical and has to be thought about. I think even with the kind of long-term horizon of 2030 or 2060, coal is still going to be part of the mix, energy mix, significant part of the energy mix. And the Indian power production, thermal power production, has a lot to be desired for. So I think when we think of financing, we also have to think of financing towards much, much cleaner coal, both change in technology, change in the sort of coal that we are using. So I think that is something that I just want to put on the table. I share the optimism of the panel and the group about the future of solar, but nonetheless, I think at least for the next 20, 30 years, we need to think about making our thermal power production much more lower carbon. I think the other thing is that obviously, there are other kind of fuels in the kind of energy mix and other technologies emerging, and there is this kind of global focus on solar for some reason, but I mean obviously at least in India's energy transition and some of the papers that we have done, we're also thinking about the future of nuclear and the future of gas in India's energy mix, and that is also part of the low carbon transition. So that's just something I wanted to put on the table from the kind of the framing perspective and the programmatic perspective at ORF. I think the other issue that obviously, I mean, I don't have I think the kind of depth that you can get on issues of financing and models for financing and private sector participation in distributed solar, from Mr. Mahapatra, I'm not going to be able to rival those, but I think I do want to talk a little bit about distributed solar. Obviously, there is a lot of enthusiasm around distributed solar, and I share that enthusiasm. And I think there are, I think my statistics are right here. We are estimating that by 2020 there's a target of 40 gigawatt of distributed solar. But the unfortunate situation is that currently, and we're far, we're 4 years away from this target. We're only around, I guess, 1 gigawatt or something, or 2 gigawatts, right? So there's a huge sort of jump that is needed to meet that target, and therefore we need to think about why that transition is actually not happening, despite the fact that many states and most states have metering policies, and obviously from a lot of reasons, distributed solar makes a lot of sense in India, and many of those issues about T&D losses, transmission distribution losses, or the need to expand the grid to remote areas, or the availability of land for utility scale solar, many of those issues have already come up. So it obviously is a really desirable transition, but that transition is not happening. And I mean, from my sort of understanding of it is that a lot of it, and I would actually welcome some input from other colleagues, from private sector view on this, but a lot of it has to do with the kind of regulatory red tape in India around distributed solar, and that is the reason why this great potential is not being unleashed. And it is, and I think many of the formal policies are fairly robust, or at least are in the right direction. But somehow the kind of permission of discoms and the ability to sell back to the grid, and a lot of these complex issues remain unresolved due to the kind of regulatory baggage or inefficiency. I think that's what I would like to call it, and therefore that potential is not realized. So I don't know if I'm offering really specific recommendations on how these need to be resolved, but definitely I think the main point that I do want to make is that there is a kind of complex interplay between technology, innovation, demand, that is going to define India's low carbon transitions, and I think we cannot lock ourselves both intellectually or technologically into, say, just a focus on utility scale solar. We need to have systems by which we're actually able to, scan the horizon for new technologies, of course, but plan a bit more dynamically. So I get worried with long scale, large scale sort of far off view, because obviously I think it has to be a much more kind of look forward, but also keep a check on what's actually happening on the ground. And I think, distributed, it'd be great to have 40 gigawatt of distributed solar, but we just have 2. So, how do we break those knots? And I think it's not formal ideas and mechanisms. I think there's a lot of information about those mechanisms. It's just that the system is not working for some reason. Can I stop at that?
Thank you so much, Vikram. Maybe, Upendra, did you want to react to what Vikram, maybe?
Well, our office is in the National Institute of Solar Energy. It's a 200-acre campus adjoining Terry's University. We, I think, don't mind buying power from the off-grid because this morning alone there were trips 25 times. So I rang up the Haryana authorities saying that, look, if at this rate, we have, power failures here. They said, no, it has been linked to a rural grid. So they would like to switch it over from a rural grid to the urban grid. I mean, so many types of grids, rural, urban, commercial, village, agriculture, but we are in a difficult grid there. So if somebody can say that they'll give totally reliable power from off-grid, we'll have it. But the other thing about the beyond solar, in fact, this famous engineer from Karnataka, Viswesvaraya, who talked about, went to the waterfall in Simoga and said, what a waste. I mean, what he meant was that, so much of water was falling down and no energy. At those days, there was no hydro. And of course, he did put one there. Now, if I look at the solar panel, I also feel the same thing, what a waste. Now, if you look at the spectrum, right now, it is a question of the photons in the light that come and disturb the electrons, and the number of electrons that are excited go to the silver and reach the bus bar, and that is how you produce this electricity. Now look at what is lost now. In the entire spectrum, beyond the visible range, and that also we are using only the photons, not the heat part. So within that, the panels can use the heat, and that is where your bifocal thing is coming in. So a panel where you can use not only the light, you can use the heat, and that will be more efficient. But I'm thinking of a panel where you not only use the visible part of the spectrum, and that is when we are talking about beyond solar. Now, right now, when you say solar, solar is a very limited part of solar. It is not the whole spectrum that we are talking about. You can go out right up to the ultraviolet, you can go up to the infrared, you can go in various frequencies. So whether this panel that we are talking for the future, the energy transition, is it going to cross that barrier of 36 or 38% that you, in physics we calculate? That is one. And in fact, somebody from McKinsey told me that if Thailand goes for entire solar, the whole of Thailand will be full of panels. They can't do anything. But then, of course, we are talking about the today's panels. The panels in future may be different. Second point is about the issues of using the common grid, the pricing. Yes, you are right. I mean, states do create problems in terms of putting. And when if you tell a bureaucrat, look, we want an off-grid market, he will say, look, to all village we are going with electricity. To all households we are giving connectivity. Why do you need a grid, off-grid, to that matter, for energy? But there is a big market. I'm told even in cities they are coming up. And the pricing is, of course, an issue. Policy is an issue. But look at Delhi Metro. If you talk to those people, they say they make profit today because of solar. 100 megawatts something they have put in Madhya Pradesh. And 3 rupees was the bidding price, 1 rupee 60 paisa is the access fee, 4 rupees 60 paisa. But even at 4 rupees 60 paisa, they have two advantages. Number one, here they pay 9 rupees. So for every unit they buy from Madhya Pradesh or bring from Madhya Pradesh, they save money, and that is why they make profit. But number two, and more important, is that they have tied up with the provincial government of Madhya Pradesh to give solar power at night. which means not that they produce at night, they use the daytime solar and nighttime their surplus they are diverting to Delhi Metro. So it is not merely the question of pricing or timing, but you can always make adjustment like the see in cities of Bangalore. I remember there was a task force when Mr. Krishna was the CM, and this task force said that in Bangalore you must have 4 Sundays. Now what it meant is that you keep Sunday is a holiday for 1/4 of the city, Monday is a holiday for another 1/4, Tuesday is another 1/4, and then you will find that every pattern changes. So it is managing the demand side of things. So true, if one embassy wants that thing, you please let me, we can talk to MNRE, we'll tie up with Delhi Metro, they can give solar power, and they can still run it. But that's a good idea. If the demand is coming from the consumers, that's a good thing. Any other comments you'd like to?
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for your intervention, and Vikram, thank you for maybe what I could say the reality check, maybe to balance the views on different visions. Yes, of course.
This grid and off-grid thing. There is one risk which the off-grid entrepreneurs always face, because government of India keeps talking that we will supply every house with electricity. So now they say, and we know that people don't want to pay, they can get away without paying the thing. So an off-grid entrepreneur has a risk that grid will come, and then consumers will disconnect there. So what happens to their investment? But one entrepreneur, I can tell his name, but what he told me, he said, listen, that's not a problem. As long as the government is will behave the way that it is behaving now, we are safe. Why? Because the moment you take a connection from a government utility, that's a discount, they charge you a fixed amount. That's the contract demand charges. They charge you a fixed amount per month. Apparently, the electricity supply is in a month is not sufficient to cover that amount. So as long as, that's what he meant, that as long as they behave this way, that means they charge more than the fixed cost does not cover in the bare minimum variables, we are safe. Because people at the end, they want a fan to run at night, light for their children to study, and probably, if possible, a heater to run, if not the pump. As long as this ecosystem is continuing, it's not a good ecosystem, but so there is a justification why it's a populist move, it's a political move, but probably it is time to think about it and build up a case for government not to go in, rather through the policy enable the entrepreneurs to supply electricity, and having a regulator to not, so that these entrepreneurs don't overcharge them. Because there is a dependence factor economics wise. Once I'm dependent on that, I will be forced to pay more and more unless there is competition or something. That part can come in, but probably there is a case against extension of grid.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, Gabriela and Anthony mentioned earlier that the OECD is developing a new program on clean energy finance and investment as part of our Center on Green Finance and Investment. And all those key trade-offs that you've all highlighted between grid and off-grid, solar and maybe other options, and the regulatory rigidities that Raghunath you just mentioned, and the need for support or not, are things that we will explore carefully with your support, hopefully all of you, because of your expertise. So I will thank you very much. And I have many questions, but I would like to open the floor for questions. Please feel free to stand up and go to one of the mic and introduce yourself and let your questions to the panelists. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rahul Chabla. I'm a fellow with the University of Chicago, and I work for the Ministry of Power and also for REC, the Power Infrastructure Financer. My question is for Mr. Mahapatra and Dr. Mathur. You mentioned the need for battery storage for solar, because solar comes for a part of the day, and at the night, if you want to still serve the customers with solar energy, you need a battery. Now, you mentioned the problem with that is you need to install a lot more capacity of solar to be able to charge the batteries too, and then supply later. Is there a solution that is possible in which we look at battery as a grid element and not just an enabler for renewable energy through solar? Now, when I say grid element, I mean during the day, if you follow the duck curve, don't back down your thermal plants, but still charge that battery, which is a grid element, with thermal, so that you don't need as much capacity of both battery as much capacity of all renewable energy sources, and then you can finally provide a more optimal system to provide provide energy even during low solar or low other wind hours. Another benefit of this would be that not only solar does it vary during the day in India, solar varies seasonally as well, so does wind. So maybe we could take care of seasonal variation this way as well. So is this a technically feasible solution? Do you think it will actually make more economic sense? I have this question for Mr. Mahapatra and Mr. Mathur too.
I think more than me, I think Mr. Tripathi is better equipped to. Yeah.
No, you are right. In fact, in the countries like USA and all that, many solar parks, they are linked to storage as a part of the grid, and sometimes it is the parks that prevent the grid to maintain its stability, other way around. So they help, maintenance of the grid. Even in India, Solar Energy Corporation of India, they have plans where 10% of the total capacity will be in terms of high storage thing. And the auction they do carry, there is an auction, they said with storage, you tell the rates, and without storage, you tell the rates. If you look at countries like Rwanda, in Africa, the leading states, now what they're doing now, a portion of the country's energy strategy they're putting for off-grid and with storage, and the type of auctions they're coming from, like Chile and all that, is called, I think next generation tenders. They don't go for solar or wind or any such specific thing. They say, look, you go for any energy you want, any renewable energy, any form, but you give 24/7. And whatever is the storage part that is required either for the plant or for the grid, that you look after. So you are absolutely right that if you look at integrated view of the stability of the grid and using storage to stabilize the grid, that itself is a great thing. Even with the blackout that occurred in 2012, renewable energy was not there. I mean, in Delhi and all that, it was a failure of the grid. And if you go to a city like Bhubaneswar and you sit in the evening, the type of demand they put in the evening, the lights will be fluctuating quite a bit because industry fellows will connect, put a direct this thing. So the instability of the grid that can be taken care of through mechanisms that you are saying. Of course, you have to find out what percentage of storage can be linked to the grid in a bigger way, because the larger the grid, the better is the stability. So in India, you find that each state has a sort of monopoly in the grid area, and if Karnataka wants to buy power from Tamil Nadu, they'll say, no, the grid has to be interconnected. But increasingly things are changing. In Europe, they are better able to manage with the grid, not only because of the engineers from India who go and develop softwares, but also because most of the countries, they are interconnected. Like German power goes to Poland, East Europe and all that. We visited a plant, a factory called 50 Hertz, and he said, the way their power fluctuation took place, they were combining solar and wind. It had come down from 18% to 3%, and that is the level of error. So, and he was telling that, look, I mean, the sun has been coming for last 5 billion years, and it will come for next 5 billion years. Now, if you think intermittency is a factor of probability, it is coming every day. Every year, the same type of climate, fluctuation take place. So, if you can capture those long-term data, and your variability will go down. If you know in future this is going to be the graph, you can control it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mathur, do you want to?
Very quick answer. Yes, storage will come as a separate grid element. We tend to talk of it because it is needed when you have variable renewable energy in the system. The issue is at what amount of variable renewable energy you would need storage and how much. So there are a number of studies going on as we speak, but all of them seem to suggest that till we reach about 200 gigawatts variable energy, you don't need storage. We will need more and more of it as time goes on, but even when you reach 100% variable renewable energy, or 60% or 80%, whatever is the peak, even at that time, the amount of storage that you would need would be somewhere in the vicinity of 25% of the total capacity. It depends, as Mr. Tripathi said, very much on the diversity in the system itself, on the interconnectedness it has, but clearly it is, as you are saying, a separate grid element which is charged when there is excess electricity from wherever it comes and is drawn out whenever there is a need.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mathur. Any other question before we close the session? Yes?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Aishwarya. I'm an intern at ORF. I have a very basic domestic level question. If I, as a resident of Delhi, would like to install solar panels at my place, so as to extract energy out of it. So I put in the initial investment of setting up the mechanism and everything. And because of how the system works, once it's set up, the energy is made on its own, right? But what the Delhi government does is it connects that energy to the meter of my house, and I have to still pay the government. So it was a very basic sort of debate at my place the other day that why would we want to get into such a scenario where we have to pay the initial bit as well as pay every month to the government? It's not sustainable for us. So do you think there's any way that such a scenario, because this is the reality right now, how can this be changed at a domestic level by the government, by like state governments?
I'm not reacting on behalf of Delhi government.
I know.
But yesterday the managing director, no, the second one, from one of the distributors, utility companies was there. He was saying Delhi is very pro rooftop in the sense they have net metering. So at the end of the month, when did you get your rooftop done? You have to compare 3 months before and 3 months after. Now if you compare, I mean theoretically what should happen, your billing amount will come down next month because your net metering, whatever solar you got and used, that will be deducted from your energy bill. That is number one. Number two, whatever subsidy you got from the central government, that apart, Delhi government apparently gives 2 rupees extra. So that way you will benefit more. So if you have already put in for last 3 months, and you must now compare the bills. If you don't find any benefit, I'll give you my email ID, you send, I'll get the company and I'll get MNRE and the state government put you to see why you are not benefiting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, and it's time for closing the session, and thanking very much Dr. Mathur for his keynote speech, and very much thank you to Pandra Tripathi, to Raghunath and Vikram for their intervention. Thank you all.